So in Pride and Prejudice, one of the most dramatic moments is when Lydia runs away with Wickham. But why? What is the underlying root cause of Lydia's elopement? Why does she just run away? What would Regency readers have thought? Well, that is a great question. And today we're going all into how Regency readers would have connected Lydia's elopement with parenting and poor fatherhood of Mr. Bennet. If you want to learn all about that, then definitely stay tuned for today's video. My name is Ellie Dashwood, and this is my channel where we talk about history and literature. If you like either of those things, please subscribe. So Lydia's most massive problem in her life is the way she was raised by her parents. Her parents are, in fact, the problem. Now, if you've seen my video on how to be a gentleman like Mr. Darcy, you are familiar with the concept of good breeding or being bred well. Of course, breeding in the time period meant education, manners, nurture. In the nature versus nurture debate, this is heavy on the nurture, right? This is how your parents raised you. Did they give you good manners? Did they give you a solid moral center and core that supports the propriety of the times? Or did they not? Were you well-bred or were you ill-bred? Now, of course, we know that being well-bred was incredibly important because we know that having proper breeding was essential to maintaining your social status, to maintaining your fine reputation as a young lady and not having it ruined with your whole future by a morality misstep. And also, finding a husband, a young lady who is properly educated and has proper manners, that has a proper level of accomplishment to go with her station in life, is much more marriable than a young lady who doesn't. So you would think that a family with 5 daughters who need to be married off, who are not financially rich, would attempt to give their daughters the best chance by giving them the best breeding, the best education, and the most accomplishments possible. However, is that how the Bennets approach parenting? Let's examine. So in Regency eyes, the Bennet girls are a hot mess, and that's mostly their parents' fault. If we look at the letter Darcy writes to Elizabeth, we see him sum up the Bennet girls this way. The situation of your mother's family, though objectionable, was nothing in comparison of that total want of propriety, so frequently, so almost uniformly betrayed by herself, by your 3 younger sisters, and occasionally even by your father. Pardon me. It pains me to offend you, but amidst your concern for the defects of your nearest relations and your displeasure at this representation of them, let it give you consolation to consider that to have conducted yourselves so as to avoid any share of this like censure is praise no less generally bestowed on you and your eldest sister than it is honorable to the sense and disposition of both. So here we see Mr. Darcy summing up the Bennet girls. He says that Mary, Lydia, and Kitty are all having a total want of propriety. They're completely ill-bred. And that's not big of wonder, seeing how their mother is also ill-bred and their father, he's kind of questionable. However, at the same time, he does single out Jane and Elizabeth and say that they have great sense and disposition. They do not share this ill-bredness. But exactly why? Why are Jane and Elizabeth so much better than their sisters? Because they all suffered from the same poor parenting example. Well, that takes us back to the difference between nature and nurture. Jane and Elizabeth have great natural dispositions. They excel when it comes to the nature aspect, and that is able to help them have this self-rectifying effect to their education and just sort of know what is correct within themselves. And we definitely saw that as a theme in 19th century literature, where you had people born into nature's aristocracy, or basically we're from nature. They were just elevated. They were just naturally what other people strove to be through nurture. So Jane and Elizabeth, nature's taken over there for them and helping counteract the poor example of their family. But more on that in a future video. Right now, we need to dive into those that did not naturally excel in their disposition, so would have really benefited from strong parental guidance and being well bred by their parents, namely Mary, Kitty, and Lydia. So, what exactly went wrong with their education? Of course, the first thing that went wrong with Lydia and Kitty is the fact that they forgot to shop the Black Friday deals of this video's partner, Foreo. So I'm sure you guys remember the FAQ 202 by Foreo. It's a new generation FDA-cleared LED face mask that I have been using for months now. And guys, it was love at first sight. Basically, back in the spring before I started using this mask, I was getting very sort of like upset and self-conscious about signs of aging. And I wanted to do something about it, but I honestly didn't really know what would be helpful. So when I got this mask, I had some hopes for it. But then guess what happened? They were all exceeded. I have been loving the results with this mask. I feel so much more confident with my skin. I feel like it's more radiant and supple and smooth, and it really calms down a lot of the redness I have because I have just the most sensitive skin on the planet, alas. And I love how this mask has 8 different wavelengths of light, including near infrared, which lets it address so many different skin concerns. And because it's wireless and made of flexible silicone that molds to any face shape, it's super comfortable to wear while I just do my normal everyday activities. Foreo has recently launched the Red Light Peptide Serum, which is supposed to help amplify the results with the mask. So you put it on and then you wear the mask, and also it comes in a pretty bottle. Total side note, if you would like to check out the Foreo FAQ 202 or other Foreo bestsellers, then this is the absolute best time because they are having amazing Black Friday deals. Just click the link in the description below and remember to use my code at DASH35 to get an additional 35% off almost all Foreo products, even those ones currently on sale for Black Friday, so that these codes can stack and you can get up to 50% off. So right now is definitely the best time to shop Foreo. Just click the link in the description, use my code. Yeah, back to the video. What exactly went wrong with their education? Well, it all goes back to Mr. Bennet. Now, of course, there are major parenting failures in both Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet in the book. In this video, we're going to be focusing on Mr. Bennet because fathers were considered the primary parent in the Regency era. You have to remember, they are the lord of creation, the head of the household. They have absolute custody of their children. They could take the kids away from the mother at any point of the day or night if they so felt like it. However, a lot of responsibility also came along with this total power, and Mr. Bennet has a lot to answer for in the story. But how does Mr. Bennet approach so grand a responsibility as fatherhood? Well, let's turn to the book. Let's look at the scene where Lizzie is very concerned about the fact that Lydia has been invited to go to Brighton, and she thinks that is a very bad idea. How does Mr. Bennet respond to her concerns? This way. Do not make yourself uneasy, my love. Wherever you and Jane are known, you must be respected and valued, and you will not appear to less advantage for having a couple of, or I may say 3, very silly sisters. We shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton. Let her go, then. Colonel Foster is a sensible man, and will keep her out of any real mischief, and she is luckily too poor to be an object of prey to anybody. At Brighton, she will be of less importance, even as a common flirt, than she has been here. The officers will find women better worth their notice. Let us hope, therefore, that her being there may teach her her own insignificance. At any rate, she cannot grow many degrees worse without authorizing us to lock her up for the rest of her life. So from this passage, we learn a few different things about Mr. Bennet. First of all, his main motivation is his own peace. He doesn't like being bothered pretty much about anything. And this has had a serious impact on how the Bennet girls have been raised their entire lives. Mr. Bennet just couldn't be bothered with them in many ways. We see this reflected in that conversation between Lizzie and Lady Catherine, the famous one where it's like, has your governess left you? Well, let's look at that conversation and see Mr. Bennet's part in it. Lady Catherine says, "Do you play and sing, Miss Bennet?" "A little." "Oh, then some time or other we shall be happy to hear you. Our instrument is a capital one, probably superior to... You shall try it some day. Do your sisters play and sing?" "One of them does." "Why did you not all learn? You ought all to have learned. The Miss Webbs all play, and their father has not so good an income as yours. Do you draw?" "No, not at all." "What, none of you?" "Not one." "That is very strange. But I suppose you had no opportunity. Your mother should have taken you to town every spring for the benefit of masters." "My mother would have no objection, but my father hates London." So here we see Lady Catherine being incredibly impertinent and rude in asking all these questions. But something fascinating about this conversation is she's also not wrong. And Jane Austen does this quite a bit in Pride and Prejudice. Well, she will have some terrible characters like Lady Catherine or Mr. Collins out there saying facts, just like cold, hard facts as Regency society would have seen them. But when it comes here into Mr. Bennet's part, it's very interesting. So first we see Lady Catherine calling out the fact that Mr. Bennet could have probably financially afforded his daughters to be a lot more accomplished than they are. She points out that the Webb sisters can all play and their father has not as much money, and it probably really was not a financial issue that resulted in the girls' poor education, but Mr. Bennet just not caring. He could not be bothered to expend a lot of time and thought and money on better preparing and breeding his daughters. And as Lady Catherine quickly realizes, this comes down to a form of parental neglect. The conversation between her and Lizzie continues. "Has your governess left you?" "We never had any governess." "No governess? How was that possible? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess? I never heard of such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education." Elizabeth could hardly help smiling as she assured her that had not been the case. "Then who taught you? Who attended to you? Without a governess, you must have been neglected." "Compared with some families, I believe we were, but such of us as wished to learn never wanted the means. We were always encouraged to read and had all the masters that were necessary. Those who chose to be idle certainly might." "Aye, no doubt, but that is what a governess would prevent. And if I had known your mother, I should have advised her most strenuously to engage one. I always say that nothing is to be done in education without steady and regular instruction, and nobody but a governess can give it." So here we see them discussing governesses. And of course, if you're familiar with a governess, that was a teacher who would come and live with a family and teach the daughters not only proper accomplishments and book education, but the vital information and manners of how to be a lady, a refined, proper lady. And that is, of course, what the Bennet girls are desperately missing, and Lady Catherine hits that dead on the head. Now, it's really fascinating because, of course, a governess was not essential. We see the Dashwood sisters, for example, in Sense and Sensibility, getting along just fine without a governess. Jane Austen herself did not have a governess, though she did go to a girls' school for a short period of time. However, if we look at the Dashwoods again, the mother of the Dashwoods is more than capable of providing that education to her daughters herself. However, is Mrs. Bennet capable of that? As we see Lady Catherine say, your mother must have been a slave to your education. That is, of course, if she had been taking it seriously to educate all 5 of the daughters. However, as we see, Mrs. Bennet did not take that very seriously. And not only that, because Mrs. Bennet is from a lower social station in the Regency world, she did not have the ability to teach her daughters how to be a lady, for she struggles to be one herself. However, that also ties back into Mr. Bennet. As we talked about in the video on female accomplishment, one thing that men were looking for in wives is whether they had the ability to be good mothers to their future children. Is this woman capable of educating my future children, of helping elevate my future children? Those were the type of questions that Mr. Bennet should have been asking himself before marrying Mrs. Bennet. Of course, we know that is not how things went down. But even after he married her, when he had all these daughters, he could have done some self-reflection and been like, my wife is not up to the task of educating these girls, nor does she have the manners and breeding herself to be able to do so, as he was incredibly aware, as we learned throughout Pride and Prejudice. So he could have employed a governess. Of course, they would have been of a social status and financial means to do so. But again, he does not. He instead leaves the education of his daughters in his wife's hands, even though he knows she can't actually handle that. Now, let's rewind all the way back to Mr. Bennet responding to Elizabeth when she's upset that Lydia is going to Brighton. First, we see Mr. Bennet not willing to be bothered, but we also see him trying to pass off responsibility for raising Lydia once again. We already talked about how he has left that in Mrs. Bennet's hands, even though he knows she's not capable of doing a good job. Here, we see him taking an even further step of doing that in an even worse way. Again, the quote says, "At Brighton, she will be of less importance even as a common flirt than she has been here. The officers will find women better worth their notice. Let us hope, therefore, that her being there may teach her her own insignificance." So like we were talking about earlier, one of the core aspects of good breeding in this time period was having a solid moral core, and especially for young ladies when it came to propriety and the way they interacted with the opposite sex. This was so important to their entire lives, maintaining their reputation, not getting ruined, not destroying everything, right? So incredibly important. Yet, will Mr. Bennet ever step in and be like, "Lydia, we need to talk about this flirting thing. This is not appropriate behavior for a young lady. You're bringing a reproach on all the family." Is he going to take an active interest in the rearing of his daughter? Not according to this quote. According to this quote, he's like, idea, the guys will ignore her, and that will teach her her own insignificance. That's my solution. Not to have hard conversations with my daughter about flirting, but rather let men ignore her. It's their job. It's their job to teach my daughter stuff. What are you doing, Mr. Bennet? This is especially interesting because it ties into the third thing we learned about Mr. Bennet in this quote, and that is that he is the king of denial. The level of denial that Mr. Bennet lives in Pride and Prejudice is astounding. But if we want to do like a psychological deep dive on the father of the Bennets, I would have to say that a lot of it goes back to his own youth, when him and Mrs. Bennet were first married. So much drama went down for young Mr. Bennet. This is their backstory, according to Pride and Prejudice. Elizabeth's father, captivated by youth and beauty, and that appearance of good humor, which youth and beauty generally give, had married a woman whose weak understanding and a liberal mind had very early in their marriage put an end to all real affection for her. Respect, esteem, and confidence had vanished forever, and all his views of domestic happiness were overthrown. But Mr. Bennet was not of a disposition to seek comfort for the disappointment which his own imprudence had brought on in any of those pleasures which too often console the unfortunate for their folly or their vice. He was fond of the country and of books, and from these tastes had arisen his principal enjoyments. To his wife he was very little otherwise indebted than as her ignorance and folly had contributed to his amusement. This was not the sort of happiness which a man would in general wish to owe to his wife, but where other powers of entertainment are wanting, the true philosopher will derive benefit from such as are given. So here we see a young Mr. Bennet in love with this beautiful, good-humored girl, only to get married to discover that she's not that smart and not that nice and, she's Mrs. Bennet. And this overthrows all of his hopes of domestic happiness, and it makes him retreat into the countryside and books as his main amusements, along with laughing at his wife's ignorance. That's what gets him through his days. And it's very interesting because he responds to his daughters in a similar way. He ignores them wanting to hang out in his library all the time. And then, when he's not doing that, he's out there again laughing at them just as he laughs at their mother. As he says of his daughters in the first chapter of the book, they have none of them much to recommend them. They're all silly and ignorant like other girls. And so we really see Mr. Bennet's fathering style being a lot like his husbanding style, as if he's given up on being a father the same way he gave up on being a husband from the start. And we see Elizabeth be like, this is why he will never check Lydia and Kitty, because he only wants to laugh at them. She thinks in the book about Lydia and Kitty. They were hopeless of remedy. Her father, contented with laughing at them, would never exert himself to restrain the wild giddiness of his youngest daughters. But basically, we overall get this image of Mr. Bennet being deeply unhappy from his early days of marriage and dealing with it through hiding in books and laughing at people. And living in this just sort of deep state of denial about it. Because any average Regency father in this time period would see the wildness of Lydia and Kitty and realize this could have some seriously bad consequences. Regency fathers in this time period were hyper aware of the threat of seduction. This was one of their biggest nightmares, that their daughters would be seduced, because not only would that be incredibly heartbreaking for their daughter, but also it would completely destroy their entire family's reputation and future. So Regency fathers were hyper aware of this, and yet Mr. Bennet doesn't seem to be. He acts as if that's not even a real possibility within the book. And it's fascinating because he even has Elizabeth sort of bringing it to his attention. So in that scene, when Elizabeth is like, don't let Lydia go to Brighton, she lays it out pretty clearly for her father. The book says, she represented to him all the improprieties of Lydia's general behavior, and the little advantage she could derive from the friendship of such a woman as Mrs. Foster, and the probability of her being yet more imprudent with such a companion at Brighton, where the temptations must be greater than at home. And yet, does Mr. Bennet listen to her, take this seriously, come out of his deep state of denial that, oh, she's not going to be an object of prey to anybody. They're just all after money. It never occurred to me that someone might just want to take advantage of my daughter. No, he does not come out of the denial. However, after the event happens, we do see Mr. Bennet realizing, yeah, I was really not cautious. In that famous scene where he's telling poor Kitty of all the changes he's going to make as a father, he says, you go to Brighton. I would not trust you so near it as Eastbourne for £50. No, Kitty, I have at least learnt to be cautious, and you will feel the effects of it. No officer is ever to enter my house again, nor even to pass through the village. Balls will be absolutely prohibited unless you stand up with one of your sisters, and you are never to stir out of doors till you can prove that you have spent 10 minutes of every day in a rational manner. So here we see Mr. Bennet after he has come out of denial about the realities of life and the dangers his daughters face. He's like, Kitty, not only are you not going to go party with a bunch of single men far away in a different town without me, but also none of them are going to come in the house, and they can't even walk through my village. Now, of course, is Mr. Bennet going from one extreme to the other extreme? Yes, and as even the book points out, that's not really going to be Kitty's reality. However, very interestingly, in this list of changes he wants to make, he hits on some of the main topics that he was always failing at. First of all, failure to guard his daughter's acquaintance. Here, he's like, no more officers in the house ever, where he should have always been screening these guys, noticing how much his daughters were interacting with them and taking steps to protect their reputations, their acquaintance, and their hearts, which he had not been doing before. We also say that he wants Kitty to spend 10 minutes in a rational manner, or otherwise he sees that he has not been making his daughters have any sort of real education his entire life. Remember, they could be idle or they could read. That was up to them. But right now, he's like, no, you're reading. You're thinking about stuff. You're doing rational things. Because that's honestly what I should have been having you do this whole time anyway. And this takes us right back to Lydia and why she elopes. The book clearly identifies that Mr. Bennet in his neglectful parenting style is one of the main underlying problems. So Elizabeth, when she is talking to her aunt and uncle on their way home to Longbourn so the uncle can go help and look for Lydia, and they're all heartbroken about Lydia running away, here is how Lizzie sums up the problem. It is most shocking indeed that a sister's sense of decency and virtue in such a point should admit of doubt. But really, I know not what to say. Perhaps I'm not doing her justice, but she is very young. She has never been taught to think on serious subjects. And for the last half year, for a 12-month, she has been given up to nothing but amusement and vanity. She has been allowed to dispose of her time in the most idle and frivolous manner and to adopt any opinions that came in her way. First of all, we hear her note that Lydia is very young. And this had yet been another point that Lizzie had somewhat defended to Lady Catherine in that scene earlier, when Lady Catherine is shocked that all of Lizzie's younger sisters are out. This is how Elizabeth had initially responded. All 5 out at once? Very odd. And you only the second. The younger ones out before the elder ones are married. Your younger sisters must be very young. Yes, my youngest is not 16. Perhaps she is full young to be much in company. But really, ma'am, I think it would be very hard upon younger sisters that they should not have their share of society and amusement, because the elder may not have the means or inclination to marry early. The last-born has good a right to the pleasures of youth as the first. A more cautious Regency father would not have even allowed Lydia to be out in society at only 15 years old, as she had been at the start of Pride and Prejudice. She was simply too young. A lot of Regency fathers wanted their daughters to wait till 17, 18, 20 years old even. They wanted their daughters to be mature enough to be able to find that life partner and to represent their families well. However, Lydia was allowed to go out at 15. So Lydia should not have been placed in this situation at all. However, Elizabeth sees many other failings of her parents as well. She says that Lydia has never been taught to think. Well, who was supposed to teach her? That Lydia had been given up to nothing but amusement. Who gave her up? She has been allowed to dispose of her time in the most idle and frivolous manner. Who has allowed this? She has been allowed to adopt any opinions that came in her way. Again, who's allowing it? So here we see Elizabeth pinning this heavily on her parents. They're the ones whose neglectful parenting that allows her sisters to be idle, that allows her to adopt any opinions that come her way, that has put her out in society at such an early age to begin with, is the underlying problem that results in this elopement. Now, of course, another major contributing factor to this elopement is the fact that Wickham is a terrible human being and a complete predator. And I am not trying to take any of the blame off of him for his responsibility in this. However, the Bennets had a major responsibility to do their best to teach and train and protect their daughter, and they didn't. So we really see a lot of this coming down to Mr. Bennet's neglectful parenting from the girls' youth on. He did not get them a governess. He did not get them proper education. Instead, he left his girls' fates in the hand of their mother, whose understanding he thinks so poorly of that he actively ridicules her. And if you will remember in my recent gender roles video, a man and a father's two main responsibilities are to provide and protect. So from Regency readers, he's pretty much failing at all of them, but we will be diving deeper into how he fails to protect Lydia in other ways in a future video. So if you want to see that, then definitely subscribe. Anyway, let me know in the comments down below what you think of Mr. Bennet. Is he a great dad, a terrible dad, a dad that's too depressed, and so he just needs to hide with books all day and he can't handle parenting? Let me know in the comments down below. And also a special shout out to all of my channel members. There are like so many of you. Hi. I have to just wave a bunch. Anyway, thank you so much for being a part of our awesome community. And as always, guys, keep being awesome because you're awesome. Bye.